Welcome back. You are watching New Day breaking news overnight. 9 people were arrested in London on suspicion of terror offences. British media reports that among them is this prominent radical cleric, Anjem Choudhury. It comes amid growing concern about deadly attacks on Western hostages abroad. That is in addition to this French hiker who was beheaded in Algeria Wednesday by a terror group that supports ISIS as retaliation for French airstrikes in Iraq. And here at home, officials are on high alert over the possibility of so-called lone wolf attacks. So a lot to talk about here on this Thursday morning. Let me bring in Clark Kent Irvin, former Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, and David Gartenstein-Ross, a senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Brooke.
Okay, let's just begin with the latest news. As we mentioned, the roundup of those suspects in London, including this radical preacher who we've actually seen on U.S. airwaves and some interesting interviews, we'll put it that way. Clark, to you first, and then to Davi, just your reaction to these arrests this morning.
Well, this raises the issue, Brooke, of countering violent extremism. There are these radical preachers, radical clerics. London has been a hotbed for such people who really turn these vulnerable young men into ticking time bombs. There's a law in Britain that allows certain groups that incite violence to be prescribed, to be banned, and membership in that group is against the law. And so, against the backdrop of the Prime Minister's announcing yesterday that the Parliament's being recalled to authorize airstrikes by the British in Iraq, it's understandable that we're seeing the crackdown that we're seeing right now.
David, I see you nodding your head. Yes. How do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with Clark. I agree with Clark. I think that the primary concern when they look at what's happening internationally is that there'll be retaliatory attacks that are carried out on behalf of ISIS. Choudhury has been very outspoken in support of ISIS. So part of their concern is that someone like him, or he specifically, could serve as a radicalizer for somebody carrying out some sort of strike, whether it's something mimicking what happened in Algeria or something that is uniquely related to Britain. That is precisely what they're trying to stop.
Okay. David, let me just stay with you because we heard yesterday at the UN General Assembly from the French president, President Hollande, mentioning, as we said, this Frenchman was killed over the weekend as he was hiking, or he had been hiking in Nigeria, and he was killed. He was actually beheaded by a group, June al-Khilafa, or translated Soldiers of the Caliphate. This isn't ISIS. They have pledged their allegiance, their support to al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader. Who are they?
Jinn al-Khalifa used to be known as the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb Center Zone. Before that, actually, this group had been part of the Armed Islamic Group during the Algerian Civil War. The Armed Islamic Group was the most radical of the various Algerian factions during that civil war. The reason I mention that is because the groups that have tended to move away from Al-Qaeda and towards ISIS are those that really don't accept Al-Qaeda's more strategic use of violence and instead like ISIS's very indiscriminate use of violence. They actually had pledged to Baghdadi a long time ago. It was several months ago when they first pledged. They just took on the new name recently. The good news there is that when you look at this brutal attack, it's something that was carried out by a group that had a pre-existing infrastructure. This wasn't just a fly-by-night organization, and that at least should make Westerners overseas feel a little bit more secure.
Okay, so that may make them feel more secure. So you have, though, these terror organizations, and then, Clark, you have the threat of lone wolves, right? We know ISIS on Sunday released this audio basically calling on people to kill, maim, hurt Westerners, Europeans, and you think of these as we call them lone wolves, right? You think of the Tsarnaev brothers in Boston, you think of Major Nidal Hassan in Fort Hood, who have in some instances been quite successful. You're surprised that there aren't more examples of these people.
Absolutely, because, if there's any good news about 9/11 style plots post 9/11, it's that they're very, very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to carry out. Lone wolf attacks, though, someone just picking someone up randomly and shooting him, stabbing him, running over with the car, which is what ISIS has urged, that's very easy to do. We're talking about one person. The plot is in his head, so there aren't the opportunities to eavesdrop. There aren't the opportunities to foil the financing. There's not an opportunity to break up a conspiracy. It's very, very difficult to prevent. The ultimate solution is countering this radical ideology, and the president was right yesterday in his UN speech to call on the Muslim community to do more to counter this extremism in their own midst.
How effective, just staying with you, how effective do you think that unanimous resolution that was passed yesterday to stem the flow of these, foreign fighters, how effective will that really be?
Well, time will tell, Brooke. As the president said, words are one thing, but what really counts is deeds.
Right.
I think the good news here, though, is that if the whole purpose of these beheadings has been to dissuade the United States and the West from going after ISIS, I think it's having the opposite effect. The French are considering now expanding their airstrikes into Syria. We've already talked about what the British are going to do. The coalition expanded yesterday with the inclusion of the Belgians and the Dutch. And so I think the world community has been seized by this, and the president is right to say the only language that ISIS understands is the language of force. And so you have the United States, Western Europe, and now critically Muslim Sunni states joining the fight against ISIS, and I think this will make the difference.
But so far, gentlemen, you know, this fight has stayed in that part of the world, right? Specifically Syria and Iraq. I mean, David, what would you say to Americans who would worry, especially now with this third wave of pretty intense airstrikes, specifically in Syria, that these people from this part of the world will not retaliate back home?
Well, there's always concerns that when there's a military operation that the kind of fallout could spread elsewhere. But over the course of the past 13 years, when the U.S. And its allies have been engaged in the war on terror, there's always been the risk of blowback. And it's been pretty minimal. I mean, the reasons why are, number one, for group operations, that's where you have a chance to disrupt it based on good intelligence work and good law enforcement. And as to lone wolves, I agree with Clark that it's very difficult to stop a lone wolf attacker. But I think one reason we tend to see so few lone wolf attacks is because group dynamics really help radicalization, people egging each other on. It's more difficult for one person to really amp themselves up for an attack.
Okay. David Gartenstein-Ross and Clark Kent Irvin, thank you both very much for your time this morning here on New Day. I really appreciate it.